Hey folks, I'm TJ Kastning, the founder of Ambassador Group and this podcast. And we've got Amy Dardis with us, who is the founder of Clear Authentic Brands and the Hiring OS. And we are here to talk hiring. Thanks for joining me, Amy. I've been super excited for this. I have been binging your content on YouTube and LinkedIn. I think you've got a lot of value to bring, a lot of really incredible insights. I've learned a lot in watching your material. So thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm curious to start what you think good interviewing is. Like, how would you define it?
That's a good question. I think good interviewing really has two components. So, one, it's understanding what you're looking for. So, when we walk into a room, I mean, the world is your oyster at that point. Like, you could go any different direction. You have this person who's in front of you, and you only have an hour of time and you're trying to get to this major decision for your company, and that is this person the right person? And so how do you determine that? First and foremost, well, you have to have that figured out before you walk into the room. So one, knowing who you're looking for is component number one, and then component number two is having an interview where you're actually having an authentic conversation. So it moves from this very weird, awkward, performative type feel, which most interviews are, and having it actually veer into a real conversation, the type that you would have with someone over coffee versus like, hey, I'm interviewing you for this job. And therefore, it feels more like a sales conversation because at the end of the day, you're going to spend a lot of time with this person, especially as the leader. You're going to be investing into this person time, money, energy. They're going to be engaging with your team. And it is the real person that shows up, right? You're going to see them on a bad day. You're going to see them on a good day. You're going to see what they bring to the table. And the idea in the interview is that you get as accurate of a feel for that as possible before they actually show up on the job.
You said a sales conversation, and that's interesting, right? Like, what do you mean by sales conversation, and what's the problem with that?
In a sales conversation, there's this added element, there's this added pressure of like, I'm trying to pitch you something, and we're all putting one side of ourselves out there, not the don't have it all figured out side, just the hey, here is the problem, here is this solution, and it's going to solve this, and it's going to be perfect, and we're going to paint this picture, which ideally, if you're doing well in sales, you are pitching something that actually is going to solve this problem. But we're talking about people. We're talking about interviewing. So we're not talking about this person isn't going to solve your problems and you're not going to solve all their problems. So when you enter into a relationship, it's more, and you use this analogy as well, as more of the when you marry someone, right? It's like when you marry someone, that person is not going to fill you completely. That person is not going to solve all your problems and be the answer to all of your happiness. That person is going to have bad days and you're going to have to work through conflict and you're going to have to compromise and communicate. And that's more of the relationship that's happening. And when we're in sales positions or sales conversations, that's not the approach we take. So it's a completely different mindset walking in. And there is a part of a pitch, right? Like when you're in an interview, there's a part of that conversation where you do have to pitch your company and you have to talk about why, but it shouldn't be the focus of just, okay, let's make the offer and sign on the dotted line. That's the transaction, which a lot of sales are very transactional, but this is very relational. So it's like, okay, we're going to make the offer, sign on the dotted line, and then what? And that's when you get into it. And that's why this interview process is so important because it's all about what does this lead to? And is what it's leading to going to be a good thing or is it going to be a painful thing.
You obviously think about this a lot.
I do.
It's 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 impacted it's impacted you, and I've enjoyed our conversations about hiring so much. I'm curious in backing up and observing the detail with which you think about this. What's the impact that you're trying to have in your firm around interviewing and hiring, and why are you so passionate about this?
So I'm so passionate about this because it all comes back to people. I always say people, purpose, and process. So we're all one, wired uniquely. We all only have so much time here on earth, and we spend a lot of it at work. And so I experienced this firsthand, first in my own journey. I mean, there's a good chunk of my career where it was me going through this process of being the employee who was not a great employee. I was a low performer. I did dread going to work. And I remember being at work and thinking in my head, there's got to be more to life than this. Like, this can't be all there is. And this is when I'm like 25. And I'm realizing that, wow, there's a lot of years ahead and this isn't going well. Like, I'm 6 months into a new job and I'm already bored and I don't know why. I don't know what's missing in my life. It was serving in ministries, even in church, where I hated it. I hated where I was serving and I didn't know why. But I'm like, man, I suck as a person because apparently I don't want to give back or do nice things for people. And it was taking a personality test. Honestly, I actually took the DISC test when I was like 28 years old. And that DISC test actually was very eye-opening for me. And it pointed out that I was wired for people and relationships. And here I'd spent the last 10 years of my life in roles that were wired for data and metrics and very routine things. So I went through this own journey of like, okay, this is really eye opening. Now I want to understand my own wiring. I want to understand, why do I feel one way working in this environment? And why did I feel a different way working in this other environment? And I started to just do a lot of self reflection. And then I also saw how quickly some of my gifts were starting to develop and the contribution and the impact those gifts were having from me actually doing work that I enjoyed and I felt good doing. And it was serving my business and it was serving the clients. And I was like, wait a minute, this is cool. Like, I didn't know I could feel like this about work. So that was what sparked this idea of like unique gifting, purpose, wiring. This is my life. I don't want to dread going to work. I want to enjoy what I'm doing. I want to feel like I'm doing something that matters and that gives back. And then I started working for one of my clients actually, because got to a season in my life where I'd kind of figured out like, this is what I'm really good at. This is how I work best. I was building websites for people, figuring out their story and their brand identity, trying to help them write their message, and realizing that that's just a surface level thing. And I really wanted to get into the meat of like a healthy company and a healthy organization. And this door opened for me to go into the gas and welding world, which I had zero experience with at all. But I ended up in there and I learned a lot about the industry. I worked for a company that had 80 employees, 6 different locations, and it was an industry that required a high level of onboarding and ramp time for people to get up to speed to be good at their job, because there was so much terminology, there was safety, there was compliance, there were all these products and services, and it was hard. And I saw us going through the interview process, hiring these people, and then them not working out. And that was very painful for the company, because we were investing thousands of dollars into getting someone up to speed, and then to have them leave 6 months in, a year in, a year and a half in, that was so painful, very expensive. And so I looked at the process and I was like, what are we doing? Like, what is our interview process? What are we asking? What are we looking for? And The short answer is there was no process. There was no nothing. It was just every hiring manager did their own thing. They made their own judgment based on gut feel, and then we paid the price for it. And so I was like, can I sit in on these interviews? Can I like see what's going on here? And one part of my natural wiring, one of my unique abilities is asking questions, and it is finding themes and patterns in stories that point to unique strengths. And so I'd been doing this for brands for the last 10 years, meeting with clients, hearing their stories, pulling out what made them unique, pulling out what made them different. And I'd been doing it in my own relationships every time I met people. If you met me at a party, my conversation, I would probably have you in a corner for 45 minutes just asking you questions about your life. I mean, that's how that's my way of socializing. And some people found that annoying, but then also I was like, but I get so much information out of this. Like I get so much more information out of this than my husband gets out of you because he doesn't ask the same questions the same way. And so I started sitting in on these interview processes and asking my questions and listening to what all the other managers were asking, and then I just started becoming obsessed with it and figuring out, how do we tweak this process? How do we make it so we are making the right decision and we know what we're looking for and we know why we're looking for it? And then being able to actually watch them come on and see how they see how they did, see how they performed, see how they fit in with everybody. It was fascinating to see, like, oh wow, I had these were the signs I picked up on in the interview. And then this is how I saw them engage with the team later. And being able to now trace all those dots and make that connection. But then the people that we brought on, they just made work so much better. Like, they were fun and they were good and they brought things to the table, and we were able to do really cool things with the business. And so to see that when you bring on the right people, it really does make all the difference in the world. But where you bring them on starts with the hiring process. And specifically, I just loved being in the interview. Just the process of asking people questions, figuring out what questions to ask, figuring out what to look for. To me, that's fun. Like, that's mentally and psychologically thrilling to solve that puzzle. And so I did it for that company, and we got it dialed in. I mean, we got it dialed in. It was awesome. And then I went back to my other web agency clients who were hiring, and I was like, hey, you guys are struggling with this big time, and can I duplicate this process from what we did with this company? Can I duplicate it with your business? And then over the years, I've just continued to refine and continue to be like, okay, how do I make this easier, simpler, more efficient? What really matters? What can we throw out the window? How long does this need to take? And then I just became really obsessed with it.
It's beautiful. So I'm interested to know, because what you just described in the gas and welding firm is the dream state for all of us business owners, right? To hire people that are an asset to the mission, a joy to work with. We want that so badly. Can you describe the macro changes in their process that shifted from them spending a lot on hiring turnover to finding that kind of alignment in their hiring? Like, what were the big shifts?
So the biggest shift, number one, started with us defining our brand. So the first thing we did, and we actually did this as a marketing exercise. So what I did with this business, or how I stumbled into this process, was accidental. But I came on to help streamline their marketing, launch an e-commerce platform, build some internal alignment. And the very first thing I did, I think I started in October, and in January, we did a full day facilitated brand identity exercise. And so we walked through, what's our why, what's our purpose, like, why do we do what we do? We figured out our core values. We figured out our target market. We went through the elements that are in the VTO in the book Traction. We used that as kind of our structure for what it was that we needed to define. So what were the three things that, sorry?
What does VTO stand for?
Vision Traction Organizer. So that's just a specific tool in the EOS framework. And I had actually read the book Traction early on in my career and found it very helpful for my own business. But then one of my conversations, which led to me getting hired, was talking to this owner about all of this internal misalignment in his business. And I was like, you need to read this book. And I handed him the book Traction. And he was like, I don't have time to read these books. And I was like, read the first 3 chapters. That's all I'm asking. Just read the first 3 chapters. And he read the first 3 chapters and then he read the rest of the book. And he was like, I want this in my business. And I was like,
What
yeah,
was the
me
light bulb?
too.
Why did he read the rest of the book?
Because the first 3 chapters talk about the problem with misalignment and then how finding alignment in your business is the solution. And it starts with this clear, simple framework. EOS is a really great operating system for small businesses that are privately owned and they have between 10 to 200 employees. And the first 3 chapters just talk about the problem, why, what they're experiencing, the pain points, how you fix it. And then the rest of the book is actually very how to. It's very practical. It's not a theoretical book. It's like, here's what you do and why, or why you need to do it and what. And then the rest of the book is how. And it's basically like an operating manual, which is why it's such a helpful book, because you're not reading a bunch of case studies and theories. You're actually reading and they show you the tools you need to use and how often you need to do it and how you drive alignment. And it's very, very helpful. We actually ended up hiring a certified EOS implementer about a year and a half after I started, because we basically self-implemented for the first bit, found success with it enough that we were kind of getting into the weeds and being like, well, what do we do here? What do we do here? And we're like, you know what? This self-implementation has been effective enough that now we actually want to just commit all in and fully implement this system and work with a certified implementer who can answer all of our questions about what we do in specific circumstances. So I actually did fully go through that process. But the first thing we did after I started was figuring out what's our brand identity. And I did it for the purposes of marketing. But then it ended up being like, oh, this marketing message, this brand message is what drives the business. That is the people we need to hire. Our core values, that at the time I was thinking, well, we need these values so we can attract the right customers so they can align with us on why we do what we do. And then I started seeing the power of, oh, this needs to go in our recruiting messaging and our interviewing messaging. And we need to be looking for people who share these values and people who get excited about this mission. And that was one of the biggest aha moments of probably my entire career, was figuring out that this brand message is both external and internal, which was really cool because I was like, we have all this figured out externally. Now let's just use it internally.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want you to help me connect some dots here.
Okay.
Why is this internal clarity, or like particularly, if I've got a position that's open and maybe it's urgent and I've got a lot of pain around it and, I want to get this position filled. I'm curious what you'd tell this leader about why it's worth slowing down enough to have this clarity for that position that I'm otherwise feeling a lot of pain around.
You're going to feel pain either way. So choose where and when you want to feel your pain. You're either going to feel pain now while you're finding someone, or you're going to bring someone on. And if they're not the right fit, you will pay a price. And that price will be 10 times, 100 times more than the short-term pain that you're feeling now. You're exchanging short-term pain for long-term pain. So when we bring on somebody, well, now we've invested in them. Like, I think the most dangerous time is after you've made the offer, and the time you have the most amount of leverage. You have the most amount of control on what's going to happen is before you make the offer. And so when people are like, I just got to get this seat filled because it's hurting the rest of my team, it's being able to sit back and say, okay, but if you bring this person on and they are not good at their job, you will have performance issues. You will have frustration. You will have gaps in your process. You will have mistakes. And now your time is going to be spent doing that. And remember, you're already short on time. And the reason your time is disappearing is because you are spending it putting out fires that you are creating.
I've lived this before, yes. So in your story, you worked at this firm. What was the name of the firm? The welding firm?
It was general distributing.
General Distributing. You had this realization around the organizational self-awareness, what their mission is, what their values are. And I'm curious then, and we just did a good job of explaining, hey, if you don't have that, right, you're gonna pay for that lack of alignment later on in the hire, which might be a lot more expensive. By the way, let's touch on that. Why do you say 50 times or 100 times more expensive? What do you mean by that? Are you just being hyperbolic? What is that cost?
Because I've spent time actually looking at the costs, not only the hard costs, but also all of the intangible costs. And unfortunately, it's harder to put a number on that. But if you really want to, I'm sure we could walk through all the hours that you spend interviewing. So let's add up the hourly rates of the people who are hiring. And then all of the hours that we spend training and onboarding. Let's add up all that. And it's not just one person, because you have your multiple different people helping get this person trained. If you have to pay for any certifications to have them get their hazmat or have them get their CDL, like those types of costs to get them up to speed. And then you have, if they are causing problems. So do you have, let's say they are ringing up product incorrectly, you're losing money. Let's say they're charging incorrectly and you're losing margin. Let's say you are having them drive a truck and they're doing it inefficiently. Let's add up the gas costs and the fuel costs and the maintenance costs to preserve those assets. Let's add all that up. And then you're dealing with missed opportunity cost. So every time you choose to say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so all of these things that you're saying no to, if you're saying no to a more efficient route because you have someone who doesn't run a route efficiently, you are paying a price for that. And it is adding up in your fuel costs. And we were in a distributor, so we had assets. We were always looking at fuel costs. We were looking at time costs. We were looking at routing costs. We were looking at the maintenance of the assets. We were looking at margin constantly. So if you had a salesperson who wasn't great at sales, they were walking away with, leaving money on the table because they didn't know how to find opportunities or they didn't know how to counteract objections, So you add all that stuff up. And then if they leave within 6 months or a year before they've even gotten to the level where they're fully efficient and you're getting your ROI on your employee, then now you've lost all that payroll, you've lost all that time, you've lost all those costs, and now you're back to the drawing board again. And so if you keep doing this with multiple positions each year, those costs compound. And over time, internally, your team, they start to lose trust in your ability as a leader to make good hiring decisions. Your values that you may or may not have defined start to mean less and less because now they're just words on a wall. You're dealing with internal drama because people aren't getting along or there's unclear expectations. So this guy's over here ranting because the other team isn't following the process. And then these guys over here are saying, I can't follow a process because I need flexibility, I need creativity. But because there's no set expectation on whether or not we follow a process or not, everyone's mad, upset. And now we're dealing with that.
And meanwhile, the mission's not being served.
Yeah. And it ends up compounding. And that becomes more of the bottleneck than what your competitors are doing or what gas prices are doing or what, what technology you need to upgrade in order to adapt to what's changing in the market.
Thank you for indulging that question, by the way. As you were watching this evolution in general distributors of identifying the mission and the values, what did the next step look like of bringing that into the interview process? And how do you think that clarity played out to helping people filter in or out, based on your interviewing technique that you implemented?
Yeah. So we had that stuff figured out. So we're like, okay, now we know the type of behavior, the type of values we're looking for. Like when we decide to go into a situation, we now have some direction on how we should behaving within that situation. And that's what values are, right? Values aren't just something you say, values guide your decisions and your behavior. So when we were making decisions as a company about what to do, we were using those values as filters for, okay, let's throw it against our values and see if it passes the test. And if it does, this is a good decision for us. And if it doesn't, now we know why. So we've started operating as a leadership team and as a company, making strategic decisions guided by those values. And then as we were in the interview process, we were looking at, okay, if our value is we value relationships, then one, we need to be talking about this when we're talking to these employees so they know what to expect. Be like, hey, we are a company that values relationships and this is what this looks like. And here are some examples of how this plays out. And then number two, we needed to know, are you someone who does value relationships? So what questions are we asking to make sure that there's someone who is relationship driven? Because we needed to find people who inherently were driven and motivated based on relationships and avoid people who that was not a primary motivator for them. So I started to see that what we had identified as our values and our brand and our purpose started to shape the questions we were asking, what we were telling the candidate about our expectations, as well as the criteria we were looking for in the candidate themselves to be like, are you going to fit this? Because if you're not going to fit this, it doesn't end well for anyone. So let's just save us all that pain and figure this out now. And then it was through that process that I figured out, okay, it's not just values. There's also a style in which we operate. There's a way that we do business that is also important, because I would see people come in who shared our values but struggled in the environment itself, because the environment itself was very fast paced, constantly changing. You had to be able to pivot, you had to be flexible, and you had to understand that this was normal. You were always going to have days where there were 10 things coming at you, and you had to figure out how to prioritize, react, follow through, not drop any of the 10 balls that were in the air. And there was also not a lot of clear documentation. It was a gray area type of business. It was not a clearly defined, like, here's our SOP, this is how we follow it every time. So we had to find people who thrived with gray area. We had to find people who were thrilled by the things coming at them every day versus people who are like, when is this ever going to end? I just need to catch my breath. I just need a break. I just need to be able to sit and think about these things and take things one at a time. That's not wrong at all. But what I saw is they would come into our environment and they would be so overwhelmed, so stressed out. They couldn't keep track of everything in the air. And then there would be mistakes. They would be frustrated and they would leave. But it was like,
How did
that
you
was
learn
the
to
nature
assess?
of the business. What's that?
Yeah. How did you learn to assess for that? How did you find those people that were comfortable in ambiguity and enjoyed the fast pace?
I started learning to look for people's natural wiring. One, I started to learn to tell them up front. And I was very bold and direct about it. I was like, this job is going to feel like you have a truck coming at you, deer in the headlights, for the next year. You are going to feel very stupid for the next year. Are you comfortable with that? Like, I want you to know what you're getting yourself into. Like, if you think within a month or 3 months that you're going to feel like, man, I got this all figured out, you're not going to. And I like, even just being able to lay that out them and then one, read their reaction to that. Like, how do they react when you come out with something so direct? If they're like, well, yeah, I could probably figure that out versus, no, I'm good with that. Man, I feel like that's my whole life, and what you have to do is find natural wiring. It's not necessarily about how someone answers a question. It's about figuring out how they operate and how their brain processes information. And you actually have to, as an interviewer, be able to do that digging and listen to their stories and understand what are they saying with their behaviors and their actions that they're not necessarily telling me with their words. So when we talk about people who are flexible, I'm not going off of whether you tell me that you're flexible. I'm going off of you giving me examples and stories of how you have been flexible in multiple different areas of your life. That's going to tell me if you're flexible or not whether you tell me that you're flexible, because people are not great at, one, always being self-aware. So sometimes people operate in a way that they don't even understand themselves. And two, in an interview process, people are more prone to tell you what they think you want to hear versus being like, no, you're right. That doesn't sound like me. And I don't want this job. They'll tell you in the interview, and then you could invite them back for the second one and they won't show up. Like, that's what they'll actually do. So I've kind of learned to go based off of people's behavior and actions, not based off of what they tell me.
You've now seen inside a lot of companies and looked at their brand and what they say their mission and their values are. And I'm curious, because I've been critical of missions and values that were concocted from a marketing perspective, and skeptical that those are the real values as opposed to what the company thinks the market wants to hear. And so but yeah, what you're reflecting is definitely authentic values if it's making its way into a filtering mechanism for the company. So I'm curious how you would describe a company that has authentic values, implementing them in the interview process, versus somebody who has values that are nice. They're good values. They look good on a piece of paper, but they're not core or central or thought about or understood or remembered in the business. How do these companies show up differently?
It's always going to be and what they actually end up doing. So if you're a company that has taken the time to define your values, the first and primary leading motivator for why you're defining those values is not for your marketing. It's actually for your decision making. So the leaders themselves, the leader himself or herself, has to define, what do I value so that I can make clear and consistent decisions about how I operate? That is where clarity starts. Then you figure out, okay, I'm going to make my decisions clearly and consistently. I'm going to know what that is. And then I'm going to figure out how I'm going to use that messaging to attract ideal clients and customers. Because what we value is already driving what we do and the decisions we make. It already does. The question is, one, are you aware of it? Have you defined it? And then two, once you define it, is that something that you're using to guide what you do? Versus a company that's like, oh, let's define our values. And we're thinking more aspirational. We're thinking more like, okay, what do we want to be known for? And they're taking it as more of a creative exercise, more of a, let's create this, let's find this out, versus branding is, or brand identity is actually a clarification exercise. We're not creating anything. You can't decide that you value something if your behaviors and your actions don't support it. So I actually start them with, let's just tell me about your story. Like, let's talk about why you started this business, how you started it. What are some of the stories you're the most proud of? How did you behave in those situations? Why did you behave that way? And we're just going based off of what has led them up until this point. And then from there, we're just extracting what the value was that actually drove that behavior and that decision. That's where we have that. And then we're like, okay, now we know what it is. So let's make sure going forward, every decision we make goes up against that. And then when we're hiring people, we're like, hey, this is what we value. And if you don't value that, you're not going to enjoy working here. And being so clear as to say that, because how many interview processes do exist out there where people actually say that directly? Not a lot.
Yeah, helping people realize what you are, what you aren't, who fits, who doesn't fit. To be clear about who you're attracting in, you've got to be clear about who you're filtering out. And I guess what you're doing, what I'm hearing is you're helping the candidate, you're actually collaborating with the candidate on whether or not they're a fit. In a lot of ways, you're looking out for them. It might not be what they want to hear necessarily about the fit, but to your point, better to figure this out now than down the road when we've committed our career and our resources, company resources to this relationship.
And I don't say it like, I mean, I can be super direct about it, and I am, but I do add the framing to it that says, this is how we operate. This is what we value. This is what we do. If this isn't you, you will not enjoy working here. Like, you won't. And so it's not just a selfish decision for us to be like, oh, well, we only want people who fit and you don't fit. But it's like, no, if you don't fit, here's how that doesn't work for you. Here's how that doesn't serve you. While you might be thinking, I just want this job, I'm trying to get you to realize, like, let's play this out 6 months down the road. Let's play this out a year down the road. I don't want you to end up in a position where you feel frustrated at work because you got into something that you did not want to be a part of. And now you have to either quit and then you're back to square one. That eats away at you. It does, to realize, like, okay, another job, another thing that didn't work out, another thing that didn't work out. And then that doesn't help you get more jobs in the future because you go through the interview process and people are like, well, why did you leave your last job? Well, because I got into something that was not at all what I expected. It was not aligned with who I was. But is that the conversation that ends up happening? Probably not. But it's like, I don't want to make this harder for you or worse for you than it needs to be, because I do want you to find a position where you're like, yeah, I'm doing work in a way that aligns with how I'm naturally wired and I enjoy it and I'm good at it. And because I'm good at it, the people around me are like, man, we are so glad to have you on our team. That's what I want for you. And if I can't give that to you in this interview offer, I'm not gonna hurt you in the long run. And so for me, that's actually where it all comes back to, is the people component. Because I care more about people than I do about business, but like business and the way it operates is dependent on people. So if we can first focus on how do I care for and serve people, that's what ends up caring for and serving the business, not the other way around.
I'm curious to learn more about what you mean when you say natural wiring. One thing I've noticed is a lot of interviewers think in terms of, good candidates. It's like this spectrum of, you got good candidates all the way to bad candidates, right? And can you speak more to how we can understand the wiring of ourselves, how that plays into an interviewer getting to know themselves, and what kind of tools you've learned to use in helping a candidate understand their wiring and the interviewing team understanding their wiring?
Yeah. I think I've been more and more focused on natural wiring the last few years, and realizing that that really is what makes someone good at a job or not. So natural wiring, I think, is just how our brain processes information, how we learn, how we adapt. And that's uniquely different for everybody. And I have learned that I am naturally word oriented versus number oriented. I process information through words and stories, not through numbers and spreadsheets and data. And you'll see this growing up. You have the people who are more math and science focused, and then more English and creative language arts focused. But it goes even further than that. Understanding that what makes someone successful in a role doesn't have to do with their experience or the training. It has to do with whether or not they have the ability to be good at that role. And I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but
What would be an
when
example of
I,
someone maybe failing because of their hardwiring?
yeah, so like, and honestly, this goes back to my own experience with this, in the sense that I was working for roles where the job required numbers and spreadsheets. That was the job. We were looking at invoices, we were looking at GLs, we were looking at things having to balance at the end of the month. And I would sit and look at that spreadsheet and realize that my brain would just freeze. It wouldn't comprehend what the numbers were telling me. But I could sit down and talk to a business owner about their business. And just through asking questions and them telling me their story, my brain could paint a picture of their operations, of their customers, of how they set out in the marketplace, how they made decisions, even without them telling me. And that's what I found is, most of the time I would talk to a business and they actually wouldn't know why they do what they do. And it was through them telling me what they've done that I was able to pull out why they do it that way and provide that clarity. And I was like, oh, no one trained me to do that. That's just something where my brain is naturally learning how to do this. Or going out and building relationships and networking. Why could I do that? Why did I enjoy doing that? And my husband didn't. Oh, and here I was working with my husband, and we were figuring out our own unique roles in the business. And our roles became dependent on what he was naturally good at and what I was naturally good at, and the impact that it made for the business. And I was like, okay, well, how do I know that you're naturally good at these things? If we've never run a business before, why do you understand some of these tasks and I don't? And we're both at the same learning level. And then I saw it again when I was working for the distributor, where I was trying to learn this industry. I had to build an e-commerce platform. So I had to understand the products, the gases, the terminology. So I went to all the product trainings. I went to all the sales trainings. I was on all the calls. I met with all the vendors to try to understand, which is what we also asked of our salespeople. So as I went through this process, I was figuring out how the industry worked and how the pieces worked together and how to use an e-commerce platform to enhance that and make it more efficient. And I could figure that out. But I could go to a welding training and try and learn filler metal and MIG process and TIG process, and nothing stuck. Like, I couldn't tell you. I've sat through hundreds of hours of like welding and product training, and nothing has stuck. Like, I have nothing. So, but then our sales guys would go through that training and they'd be like, yeah, cool, that's super cool. And they'd get it and you'd see. But it's like we had the same level of comprehension going into it. So why did they get it and I didn't? And we sat through the same training. Or why would I explain e-commerce to some people and they would get it and other people wouldn't? And so it's like that came to be like this natural wiring thing. So when someone is going into a new sales role, we hired for sales roles a lot. If they've never been a gas and welding salesperson before, and we have to train someone who's green, which is often the case, what was I looking for that was going to make them a good salesperson? What were the natural abilities they needed to have so that when we trained them, their brain was going to get it? And they were going to be like, oh, yeah, totally. This makes sense. And they were going to be really good at it and learn really fast versus the people who we would train and they just was like, it was like pulling teeth, you know? You're like, okay, but you got to do this and you got to do this and you got to do this. And like, okay. And then nothing. So I
It's
think,
not for lack of trying, right? They are
right,
trying.
exactly. But we think in our heads, oh, they just don't care. They just, they're just not getting it. Like they're just not trying
Bad
hard
candidate.
enough. They just don't want to work. And it was like, no, that's not it. It's not that they don't want to work. It's not that they don't care. Is that their brain does not work like this. They are in a role that doesn't align with their natural wiring. And that's on you. Like that is on you as the interviewer, the hiring manager, the leader. You missed that. And you made the decision to bring them on. And now you're frustrated and they're frustrated and your team is frustrated and you have a problem and you want to blame it on them, but it's not on them. And I think that's where most businesses end up. How many people today are in the wrong roles? A lot. I spent 10 years in the wrong role. That's a long time.
Scott Prickett, shout out Scott Prickett, Culture Index advisor, incredible guy. He gave me the this great analogy the other day. It's very simple. It's like hiring left-handed people to write with their right hand.
That's a great
They'll
analogy.
try,
That's a
but
great analogy.
it's just never gonna be as good. You're asking the wrong thing from the wrong person, and just we're looking for right-handed people for right-handed writing, and the same with left-handed. Obviously, people are more complicated than that, but I found that
Yeah.
helpful distillation.
But it just ends up coming back to understanding the person. And in most interview processes today, we think that someone's previous history, job history, is what indicates what someone is good at. And so you walk in and people are like, well, tell me about your last role and what systems were you using and what were you responsible for? And in my head, I'm thinking none of those questions matter. Not a single one. Because they'll tell you what they were responsible for. They'll tell you what systems they did use. but you're making an assumption that they understood them or that they were good at them or
Or
that
their
they,
previous boss understood these things and put them in the right role.
yeah. And it's all based off of false assumptions. So I say, like, don't assume anything. Don't even worry about what it was, what they were responsible for. If you want to know if someone is a systems driven person. So I was like doing this example of like, okay, let's say you have to hire a dispatcher and they have to run your field software and they have to be really good at working in the system, and not only working in the system, but also creating organization and creating systems. So you need someone who's a systems driven person. And whether or not they've ever had experience in any type of dispatcher role or field software role doesn't actually matter as much as you think it does. What matters is, are they a systems driven person? Does their brain naturally create systems within their life? And a systems driven person will create systems in all areas of their life because that's how they're wired. That's what motivates them. Or if someone is, yeah.
Sorry for interrupting, but it strikes me that if you can do this, if you can stop looking so much at background, which I don't think you're saying it's not important, but it's not the signal often that we think it is, and we're hiring for a dispatcher, we have just increased the number of candidates that might be a fit for our job enormously. We've potentially made the process of recruiting and hiring for this dispatcher job much easier than if we can only find people with prior dispatcher experience.
Yeah, it absolutely opens up the pool. And I think often a lot about the trades industry and how you have this silver tsunami and you have this massive labor shortage gap of experienced people because so many of them are retiring and there's not enough coming into the market who have the experience. So you are faced with a labor shortage. Chances are, if you need to continue to hire electricians, you need to continue to hire plumbers and HVAC people, you are going to have to invest in growing your own. That's going to be the way forward. But what you need to know is, when you're hiring someone who's completely green, what abilities, what natural wiring would make someone good at problem solving, diagnostic, customer service. The role responsibilities themselves take it further and say, if they have to be responsible for this, what natural ability would someone need in order to be good at these things? And I think that's the step that most businesses don't.
It's fascinating. My last question for you is around the interviewer themselves, and particularly Dunning-Kruger, right? I know you've seen a lot of interviewing teams, you've worked with a lot of interviewers, and I'm curious how you would advise, somebody listening to this in how to evaluate their own skill set around interviewing, where they're at competence-wise as an interviewer, as to not be subject to the Dunning-Kruger effect where, they don't know what they don't know and they have an excess of confidence about the risks that they're taking in interviewing, and potentially, going to get hurt if they're not being careful. How do you help that person see where they're really at?
I think we have to look at we have to look at the evidence, right? So, are you a good interviewer? Well, look at your team. Do you have the team you want? When you look at the people who work for you, are you super thankful and glad that they all work for you? If you are, you're probably a good interviewer. You probably have a natural wiring for being a good interviewer. You kind of know what you're looking for. Maybe you don't have the science and the art fully defined and clarified, but if you can look at your team and people, you have that component dialed in your business, you're doing a good job. If you look at your team and they're not your dream team, you're missing out. There are things that are happening in the interview process that you're missing out on. If you have people who are not performing to the level that you want them performing to, they're most likely in the wrong seat. If you have people who are really good, but man, you're dealing with their attitude, you're dealing with the interpersonal dynamics between your people, then they don't align with your values or the values of the rest of your team. So you're missing things in your interview process that are leading you to make a decision that is not serving you or them or your team in the long run. So look at what you have first and foremost. And that'll tell you right there. I mean, and I think that's like my approach for everything is like, look at the evidence, look at what exists today, look at the decisions you're making. Are you proud of your decisions? What fires are you dealing with? Where did those fires start? And did you create those? Because when it comes to people, when it comes to hiring, you have 100% control over who you make an offer to. 100%. The issue is you make an offer to the wrong person, and now you have a much bigger and more painful problem to deal with. And if you don't know what you're doing wrong in the interview, if you don't know what you're missing, yeah, you're going to be afraid to let your other people go because you might just go back and make the same mistake again. And then you just stay stuck in this process, which is why it's like you have to figure out, how do I make this process good? How do I know what I'm looking for? So that at least when I get rid of people who aren't working out, I'm confident in my ability to go through this process and make a good decision. And that's all going to start with, one, figure out what you value. Like, be clear about who you're looking for. Understand what are the natural wiring that is required to succeed in any role. Ask your questions through that criteria and always do 2 interviews. And I mean, that right there that'll steer you, like, you'll find some significant improvement just doing like those few things.
It's wonderful. Such a simple diagnostic too. I love that. It's how well is the team doing, right? That's the answer right there. Beautiful. Okay, so Amy, thank you so much. And folks, you can find more of Amy on YouTube, Clear Authentic Brands. You have a newsletter as well, and a podcast, wherever podcasts are sold. And then a website, clearauthenticbrands.com. You can hire Amy to help you with her hiring OS to reform and improve your own hiring, bring your mission, vision, and values to the forefront of that process, and help your business be more successful. Amy, I'm really glad that we had this conversation. Thanks for your time.
Me too. Thank you.